So let's use the order to cash process that you built. Can you walk us through the phases you go through to build the case for it, plan out the project, resource and manage the project? You've got to have internal buy-in. Then you've got to pull through for people actually making sure they do what they need to do in the field and in the business. Can you kind of walk us through using that as an example for, number one, what the steps are, and number two, from a sales and marketing, or just really from a stakeholder perspective, what are some of the best practices in working with your team so that we can be better at doing that as you go through it?
Yeah. So let's break it down. How do we approach it? So now one of the things that I think a lot about when I'm approaching these types of projects is how do we think about an ask in its end to end? So one of the things about working with a systems team is that we're ultimately accountable for the overall health of the systems. And it's an interesting process for us to understand what a business is asking for, and then trying to put that in the context of either another set of business asks or the platform on the whole. We also have situations where there are multiple stakeholders, and order to cash is a good example of one. Kind of the demand gen flows is another good example of that, right. Where as a business owner, or as maybe a sales manager, you're in your mind thinking, it's taking too long for my teams to get contracts out the door, right? And then on the other side, the finance systems team is thinking, like, I need to be able to ensure that this contract has the correct margins, or is like feeling good about that. And the legal team is sitting there thinking, like, what are these contract terms? Like, let's make sure that those make sense for the business. So when we get these asks, part of what we think about on the more complicated asks, but even on the smaller ones, is, who are all the players in this ask? What is it in the context of the larger process flow? And what is it in the context of the larger systems? And that's something that I've had the opportunity to do a lot, and something I quite enjoy is how do we put this, frame it out and where it wants to be. The other thing that we need to do on our side is think about how we get from point A to point B, and can we do it in one shot, or to your point, does it have to be kind of a multi-step process? And some of these things are quite complex, and so we're not going to win it all at once. So for us, starting with that problem statement, and then working through with our business partners an alignment on the overall problem statement, what we ultimately want to achieve, and then agreeing on how do we iteratively get there. So what are interim wins along the way are something that we benefit from, and we benefit from that partnership. In terms of resourcing and pulling the thread, I think I'd say it varies wildly depending on your circumstances. And systems tends to be lagging behind the business. I have yet to be in an environment where we weren't coming in 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 years late. It's just the nature of it. I think SaaS has it has this sheen on top of it where you're just like, oh, I can just get a Salesforce account and probably have one person manage it, and it's going to be okay. Like it's easy,
right?
And actually, that's not wrong for a period of growth. But then when you start to get into these more complicated asks, or you start to get into architecture questions, or you start to need to do development, then that tool becomes something quite serious to take charge of, and you need a team that is dedicated to it and experienced. I talk to folks about this a lot, where there's a whole period of time where you really just go experiment, like try to find your way. You don't need to hire, a technical architect and a full team and everything like right out the gate. But as your business starts to take off and you start to have those needs, having an experienced person who's seen it before come in can really help you figure out what you want to navigate over the course of the next 2 years. So I think the resourcing thing, it's very varied. But if you want to tackle a more complex workflow, or you want to kind of really empower a part of your business, that's the point where you start to think about these dedicated resources. Right. And that's the point I'm looking at. For my team, when I come in, I survey the landscape. What are our biggest challenges? What do we want to think about? And what are our business partners talking about? What aren't they talking about that is probably going to doom us anyway? And then how do we line those up? And what kinds of resources do I need? Do I need a lot of business analysts? I might need a lot of business analysts right out the gate, because I may need to spend time helping the business articulate their ask. That actually is a weird one. Often I work with business partners and they're kind of like, where's the admin and where's the developer? And I'm saying, well, those are execution folks, and you want a partner right now who's going to help you think through your process and then make sure that we're reinforcing the right behaviors. So I'm going to actually get business analysts to define that. And then once we have those definitions, we have a bunch of different levers we can pull in terms of execution. I personally enjoy building teams that are really dedicated to the business. So we always have a mix of technical and BAs full-time on the team. Most of our projects, the big ones, take 12, 18, 24 months. So you really want someone who is excited about the end-to-end and will build the continuity. But there are I work for one, there are amazing partners who will come in and help you with resourcing. And we also pull that lever a lot on our team. But we do it in the context of making sure that we have the business requirements anchored and we know what we're going after. So I think to kind of rewind back to your question on how we approach these things, what's important for us is understanding what we're solving and being able to really work with the business to understand what their objective is. And if it's a project where we know it's going to take more than a quarter or more than a month to go after, making sure that objective is something that is very solid. And that's what I was talking about earlier, right? Your objective being speed to lead, your objective being speed to contract, your objective being, I don't even know, there's those kinds of objectives where even as time passes, we're going to keep after that.
Right.
Also helps make sure we feel successful together over the course of the year or two it takes, and that we can measure our progress against it. The failure modes that I've seen is when we don't know what we're solving for, and instead we get the kind of partnership where it's, I need this field, I need this thing, I've already solved it for you, like just go build it. We can do that, the probability that it will ultimately build into the kind of system or process that we both want together is not super high. And sometimes those are like sometimes on the margins, it's okay. We'll put in a field, we'll kind of get going. We are here to empower and enable the business. And that's something that I talk about with my teams quite a bit. Like our responsibility is to empower the business. And so we should understand where they're coming from and then try to get them there. Ideally, we do it in partnership, in process and solution design. Sometimes we just kind of have to crank. So
you've alluded to a little bit throughout your answers, but as you're going through every single one of these projects and all of your decisions, thinking as an end-to-end process thinker, where you're keeping the big picture in mind while you're able to zoom in and out of the details and the different requirements, and how do all these things stick together over an entire project over a sustained period of time. How do you bring stakeholders along with you in that journey? Because you're saying no a lot, you're saying yes a lot, you're saying no a lot more than you're saying yes, and you're also telling them, hey, please wait. Being a sales and marketing operator myself, I know that we could be impatient every once in a while. So how do you bring stakeholders along in those conversations? And what are some of the best practices you use for communicating with stakeholders? Because you're so good at that naturally, but that is not necessarily a sales and marketing operator's forte as they're thinking about, just what they want to do for that quarter or that half or that year.
Yeah. So I've had a couple different approaches. I think once again, it's an interesting one that you say. It's a strength that I can think that way. And sometimes one of my weaknesses is getting it out of my mind and onto a piece of paper. And so what I've gotten better at over time is making sure everyone who knows me knows I love a whiteboard. I actually don't think that most people in these complex scenarios, there's a few of them that can, if you describe it with words, actually can follow along.
That's a good point.
Like if someone starts, if I focus extremely hard and someone is describing something, I can usually think that I've understood. But sometimes when they put it on the board, I realize actually I didn't. So one of the techniques that I use, and I actually encourage kind of everyone on my team to do, and I encourage our partners to do, is write it on the board, write your process on the board. On our side, we'll write then the system on the board. And let's all look at it and then talk about the areas that we don't understand or talk about the areas where we want clarification. In our side, when I start to think, okay, here's our end-to-end process. Now we have all these systems. Helping people come along, part of it is by laying out, here's the areas that, maybe we're going to be able to accelerate quickly. And here's the areas where I either don't have complete control, I'm going to have to negotiate with a partner, or is technically complex. So let's look at the whole thing end to end. But starting that visual from the process, and it doesn't have to be elegant. It doesn't have to follow all the fancy flow chart, actual diagrams. I do love that stuff sometimes, but, get a pen out, sit down together and make sure that you both are actually speaking the same language, and then that your priorities align. So I might get really passionate about some part of the process that somewhere else I've seen be really interesting, and that might not really be what you're passionate about. Or I might be able to bring some insight because I've seen this at a larger company. I can say, hey, 2 years, we don't have to face it today, but 2 years from now, we're going to need these kind of controls. I'm telling you that I want to build this foundation in today because I'm looking forward. Do we agree that that's an okay thing to do? But even get it out of your mind, get it onto a board. That's a huge one. Then, like I said, on the transparency side for our team, we have milestones. We are sending out sometimes weekly or biweekly updates on how we're progressing against those phases of the project. We're checking back in. What has changed? Have our priorities changed? Have some of the kind of more micro points within the plan do we need to adjust? Have we learned something new that's going to shift something out? Those are the muscles that we exercise. But I think the first and most important thing is, can we all get in a room and can we look at this thing end to end? And are we speaking the same language? And I'm not going to say it verbally to you. I'm going to show you. And then, pull out a pen and mark it up and tell me where it's crazy, or tell me where it doesn't work, or tell me where your world is different. And that way we on my side of the house have the context of where you're coming from. And then you on the business side can understand how we're thinking about the approach, and no one is surprised.
Nice.
That would be the tactic that I think about a lot.